The wind howled across the empty plains as Sarah stood outside the small wooden church, clutching her crying baby to her chest. Her eyes were red, not from the cold, but from the whispers that followed her wherever she went. The townsfolk had gathered after Sunday service, pretending not to stare, yet their judgment was louder than any sermon. "Poor girl," one woman muttered. "No husband, no future." Sarah pressed her lips together, holding her baby tighter. She didn't owe anyone an explanation, but the weight of their scorn pressed against her like a storm she couldn't escape. Her son's tiny fingers clutched her coat, and she whispered, "It's just you and me, little one." Days turned into weeks, and Sarah worked tirelessly at the small diner on Main Street, scrubbing floors and serving coffee to men who never met her eyes. Every day was a battle, between exhaustion and pride. The ranch hands would chuckle when she passed by, murmuring cruel jokes about the woman who couldn't keep a man. But Sarah kept her chin high. Her baby boy, Samuel, was her reason to breathe. Each night, when the world turned quiet, she'd hum him lullabies her mother once sang. In those moments, the world seemed kind again. Yet, deep down, she longed for someone to look at her without pity, someone who saw her strength, not her scars. One morning, while sweeping the porch of the diner, Sarah heard the heavy thud of boots behind her. She turned to see a tall cowboy dismounting his horse, dust rising around him. His name was Luke Callahan, a rancher known for keeping to himself. His eyes were a calm storm, quiet but deep, holding stories untold. "Ma'am," he said with a respectful nod, "you dropped this." He handed her a small wooden toy horse that had fallen from her apron. It belonged to Samuel. Sarah smiled softly, whispering a thank you. Luke looked down at the toy, then at her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt seen. Over the next few weeks, Luke began stopping by the diner more often. Sometimes for coffee, sometimes for pie, but mostly to talk. He'd ask about Samuel, about her day, about how she managed it all alone. The others noticed, of course. "Careful, Luke," one of the ranch hands teased. "You'll catch her bad luck." Luke's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Instead, he left a generous tip on the counter and nodded at Sarah before leaving. Sarah felt a warmth in her chest she hadn't known in years, a fragile hope blooming in a barren heart. When Samuel turned 1, Sarah hosted a small celebration behind her cabin. There wasn't much, just a cake she'd baked herself and a few wildflowers from the meadow. Luke showed up unexpectedly, holding a wooden rocking horse he'd built with his own hands. Sarah was speechless. "Every boy needs something to ride," he said, placing the gift beside Samuel, who clapped with joy. The sight made Sarah's eyes glisten. It wasn't about the gift, it was about being seen, being valued, being treated like she mattered. For that one afternoon, laughter replaced loneliness. But peace never came easy in that town. Gossip spread like wildfire when folks saw Luke spending time at Sarah's cabin. The women whispered behind church walls, calling her shameless. One evening, as Sarah walked home from the diner, she overheard two men talking by the saloon. "That cowboy's making a fool of himself," one said. "Raising another man's brat." The words stung, slicing through her heart. She wanted to scream that they didn't know her story, didn't know the pain she'd carried alone. But instead, she just walked home quietly, tears blurring her vision. Luke found her crying that night, sitting on the porch with Samuel asleep in her lap. Without a word, he knelt beside her. "I heard what they said," he murmured. "Don't let their bitterness steal your peace." Sarah looked at him, her voice trembling. "They're right, Luke, he's not your son. You don't owe us anything." Luke looked at Samuel's sleeping face, then at her. "You're wrong," he said softly. "That boy's got more courage in him than any man I've met in this town. And you, Sarah, you've done what most couldn't. You've stood tall when the world tried to break you." From that night on, Luke's visits became more frequent. He'd help fix the fence, bring firewood, and teach Samuel to ride ponies. The whispers continued, but Sarah stopped caring. The sound of Luke's laughter mixing with Samuel's giggles filled her home with warmth. For the first time, she wasn't surviving, she was living. Yet, deep in her heart, she feared it wouldn't last. The world had a way of taking joy from those who dared to hope. Still, she prayed that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. One stormy evening, Luke didn't show up as usual. Hours passed, and Sarah began to worry. Lightning cracked across the sky as she bundled Samuel in a blanket and ran toward the ranch. She found Luke in the barn, tending to a wounded horse. He was soaked, his hands muddy, but when he saw her, his eyes softened. "Couldn't leave her out here," he said, patting the horse's neck. Sarah stepped closer, her heart pounding. You can't save everyone, Luke, she whispered. He looked at her then, rain dripping from his hat. No, he said, voice steady, but I can try. The days that followed bound them closer than ever. Luke became part of their little world, fixing things that were broken, not just fences, but hearts. The townsfolk noticed the change. Some sneered, others stayed silent. But Luke never flinched. One morning, he walked into the diner with Samuel perched on his arm. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. He smiled at the boy, then turned to the room. This here, he said proudly, is my son. Silence filled the air before one man scoffed, he ain't your blood, Callahan. Luke's gaze hardened. Blood don't make a man a father, he said. Love does. The moment echoed through the town. Some folks began to see Sarah differently, not as a scandal, but as a survivor. Luke's courage forced them to confront their own cruelty. He didn't just defend her, he lifted her up. Over time, the gossip faded, replaced by quiet respect. Sarah's diner became a place where even the coldest hearts softened. Samuel grew up surrounded by warmth and laughter, calling Luke, Pa, without hesitation. And every time he did, Luke's heart swelled with pride. Years later, as the sun dipped low over the plains, Sarah stood on the porch, watching Luke teach Samuel to rope cattle. The air smelled of hay and freedom. She thought back to that lonely woman who once feared every whisper. Now, she was stronger, because someone believed in her when no one else would. Luke walked over, wiping sweat from his brow, and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. You still worry too much, he teased. She smiled. I just never thought I'd have this. He kissed her forehead. You earned it, Sarah. Every bit of it. When Samuel turned 10, the town held its annual rodeo. Luke entered Samuel in the children's division, and as the boy rode his small horse with confidence, the crowd cheered. Sarah stood by the fence, her heart bursting with pride. She looked at Luke, who tipped his hat with a grin. The same people who once mocked her now clapped for her son. It was redemption, slow and quiet, but powerful all the same. Sometimes justice doesn't roar, it whispers, carried by the wind across open fields. That night, as they sat by the fire, Samuel looked up and asked, Pa, was I always yours? Luke smiled, pulling him close. From the moment I saw your mama holding you, son. You didn't have to be mine by blood, you were mine by choice. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, gratitude too deep for words. Love had rewritten their story, turning their pain into something sacred. The flames danced, casting golden light on their faces, a family forged not by fate, but by courage. Years later, when Samuel was grown and ready to take over the ranch, Luke sat on the porch, older but content. Sarah sat beside him, her hand in his. The world had been cruel once, but they had faced it together and won. Every scar, every tear, had led them here, to a life built on love, not judgment. As the sun sank beyond the horizon, Luke whispered, You know, they used to laugh at us. Sarah smiled. They don't anymore. And somewhere beyond the fields, the wind carried their laughter, a promise kept, a love that endured. Because sometimes, the greatest strength isn't in fighting the world, it's in choosing love despite it. And when one man chose to lift a child and call him his son, he didn't just change one life, he changed them all.